Today in Draw My Life, a Muppet haunted me in my dreams. I've had this story for a while, but no one to tell it to. This isn't going to be a horror story because all of this ended about 5 years ago. It's more of a recollection of stuff that happened to me as a kid. The story starts when I was young. The first memory I have of me is on a crib, so I assume I was about 3 years old. And like any 3-year-old's baby, my parents tried to entertain me with cartoons. But we didn't have any of those modern cartoons like Yo Gabba Gabba when I was a kid. We had the Muppets. I still really like the Muppets, and I'm sure a lot of people do too. But from now on, what I'm about to tell you won't be so fun. My first nightmare, or rather, the first one I can remember, was about Gonzo. He was standing over my crib, staring at me. He was making a strange sound with his breathing. All I could see was his silhouette in the moonlight through the window. He was wearing a red robe. But the creepy part about my dream wasn't that he was staring at me with murderous intensity, but that all my surroundings looked exactly the same way as they did in reality. Just before the nightmare ended, his eyes widened, his mouth opened, and I heard a groaning exhale as he brought his hands closer to me like he was going to pick me up. I'm so used to my mom leaning down to pick me up that I giggled, and I raised my hands too. The next thing I know, it's past dawn and I'm awake. About 5 minutes later, Mom comes into my room and picks me up. My second nightmare was when I was 5 years old. This nightmare is the reason why I still sleep with my door open at night. Everything was dark, cold, and radiant energy of foreboding filled the air in my room. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched, and you know you're not alone, but you don't know who's watching? Saying that I felt mortified is an understatement, made even worse by the fact that I was entirely unaware I was dreaming. Once again, my room looked as it did in real life. Same sheets, same pajamas, same toys in the corner. Everything felt realistic, like a very smooth stop-motion animation. I peeked my head out from under the covers. The door slowly creaked open. I was too terrified to move, and intrusive thoughts raced through my head. If I move now, I could be seen, I said to myself. Best just to play dead, because the head that creeped through the door crack wasn't Mom's or Dad's. Hello. The nightmare ended there. I screamed as loud as I could, and my body filled up with adrenaline. You know the feeling when you squeeze your eyes shut, it feels like you're suddenly in a lot of pain, and then you wake up in a cold sweat with a pounding heart? Too scared to even swallow because of how loud it might be to anything still lurking in your room. I stayed frozen like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, I got up the nerve to shout for my mom to come and get me, because I was too scared to even make my way to their bedroom. When I was 7, I came down with a terrible chicken pox, and I remember a brief confusion when I woke up with a stuffed animal in my bed. My uncle, who was visiting, believed that my mom had bought me the stuffed animal, but my dad had never seen it before. My mother insisted that my uncle had brought it with him since he had kids my age as well. None of the 3 adults who were around the time knew where it had came from. So far, we've gone over 2 childhood nightmares and 1 confusing stuffed animal. But this is just the beginning of it. It gets much worse. Specifically, when we moved out of the house and into a condo when I was 11. Briefly, that nightmare subsided after my bad case of chickenpox went away. Now, I'm not saying I didn't get nightmares after that. I just didn't have any super vivid or Gonzo-related nightmares again until I was about 11. From ages 11 to 15, the nightmares returned. Not a week went by without Gonzo appearing in my dreams. And you know how, in the dark, if you close your eyes, you can see images on the inside of your eyelids? It was always a silhouette of Gonzo laughing. Even if the dream wasn't related to Gonzo, I'd wake up in a cold sweat and say, "Oh boy, that was a terrifying dream." And then I'd see his laughing silhouette, and my mind would curse in a low, angry voice. Gonzo, Gonzo, Gonzo. I was 13 at the moment, and this is when things become very spooky. My mother went shopping, but since I'm still not old enough to be left on my own, or so she said, overprotective always been her thing, so I went with her. We're toying around, but then as we're walking, we found this strange part of the mall. We found an extra hall we haven't seen before. At the very back of the mall, where I thought it was just a dead end, there was an entire section to the left that went out for a good 40 feet. The only store open was a Muppet souvenir store on the right. I felt uneasy in the pit of my stomach, but my mom is very cynical. She told me to stop acting weird as she pulled me by the hands towards the Muppet store. She wanted to take a look inside. Most of the souvenirs were plates, keychains, books, and really anything else you can think of, featuring Kermit, so that was nice. She picked up a few different items, gave them an appraising stare, and placed them back. There were a bunch of Kermits, Miss Piggies, animals, even a beaker and a Bunsen, and yes, there was one of Gonzo. I'd like to clarify, the Gonzo plush from when I had the chickenpox was small, like a Beanie Baby. It could fit in one hand. These stuffed animals were bigger. My mom bought Gonzo and Kermit despite me politely refusing her to do so. It had been a few weeks since we bought Gonzo. Nothing out of the ordinary. Mom was getting used to me heckling the Gonzo doll every time I saw it. She's on the couch putting her printed photos in one of our family albums. She had printed out all of our good pictures. She had 2 albums, which she had placed one on top of the other on the counter by the kitchen. She then turned to me and gave me a speech how she had to go run an errand and was letting me stay home for the first time since I was now a teenager, blah blah blah. I nodded my head and said what she wanted to hear. She was gone. Perfect. Finally home alone so I could play as many video games as I wanted. So that's what I did about for 10 minutes until I heard a big slapping noise coming from the living room. I walked into the living room, and sure enough, the albums Mom had precariously stacked on one another had toppled over. They were both now on the floor, with the pictures everywhere. Being the good daughter that I am, I decided to gather the pictures and place them back in the envelopes. I looked at every picture I picked up just out of curiosity. I wish I hadn't looked at the last one. I really wish I hadn't. The pictures were all from a vacation I can't remember, but there were a lot of nature shots, lots of trees and skies, yet the last one was red. So let me try to describe this. In this picture, Gonzo was sitting in the chair in our old house. Not just Nightmare Gonzo, the exact Gonzo Mom had bought from the Muppet store. Mouth wide open, eyes fixated forward like it was staring at me. Everything was red. The entire floor space was covered in blood, from the legs of the chair to the end of the picture. Bodies and corpses. They didn't even look like they had faces. Everything was bloody. The dresser had a red streak of blood across it. The credenza was speckled with it. In one corner was Kermit with a rope around his neck. Everything had blood on, except for Gonzo. I freaked out. I lost it completely, and I called my mom and told her to come home as soon as possible. She told me she would be home when she finished her errand. I carefully placed the photo on the table and got a terribly haunting feeling that the more I stared at it, the more it would hurt to look at. The pressure inside me boiled over, and I couldn't take it anymore. I started screaming as loud as I could, and I didn't stop. While running up the stairs, I didn't stop. When I lunged for the Gonzo doll, I didn't stop. And when I beat the stuffed animal, tearing its nose and face off, ripping its limbs apart, I still didn't stop. Mom came home, I was still hyperventilating, and the picture was gone. So, I got in a lot of trouble for wasting her time and destroying one of her stuffed animals. That's all there is to it. I'm now 20 years old, and since I tore the doll apart, no week passes by that I don't get a visit from the blood-torn apart Gonzo. I don't know what else to do to get him out of my mind. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. Leave us in the comments what you would like to see next. Come on, don't be shy. And also, subscribe. See you later!